Hello there. Thank you so much for joining me for part 4 in this series. I am so grateful and thankful that if you've listened to parts 1, 2, and 3, that you've come back for part 4. I don't take it lightly that I'm dealing with heavy issues that deal with, the core of who we are. And so, like I said, I just don't take it lightly that you've chosen to continue, and I pray that what you've heard so far has been a blessing and caused you to think about things in a new way. Before we get into part 4, let's just recap what we discussed in part 3. And so we saw how, everything that God made was good. From the beginning, God saw what he made and he said it was good, very good. Specifically, he made a special order of creation, a special order of being, which is mankind, which he divided into male and female, into two genders which are distinct, male and female. And man is very special because, unlike the other creatures that God made, the male and female actually reflect his very image. They reflect the image of God. So we saw that they're distinct genders, but they actually complement each other, and that both are needed to reflect God's image, and they are both equally beautiful in God's sight. He said it is good. And we also saw that Satan's hatred for all that God has made good, has led him to wage another war of words, this time on mankind. And his hatred has led him to ultimately attack the essence of who we are as male and female. And we saw how the effects of his hatred and that war that he's waged, that deception that he's waged, has played out in our culture today. And it even goes as far as into the medical field about how people treat those with different conditions that they think, they're not a man or they're not a woman. So the effects are far-reaching. And then we ultimately saw that Satan is pleased when we are confused about our identity as male and female. Because really at the heart of it, he understands that he is marring the very character of God. He is distorting the very character of God. And so that's what we discussed in part 3. For part 4, we're going to continue to talk about how Satan's hatred has played out, not just in our identity as male and female, but he has also attacked our sexuality and how we interact with each other. So we can see from the beginning in the book of Genesis that marriage was one of two institutions that God established before sin entered the picture, before the fall of man. So we're going to talk about marriage. The other institution we'll say for a different time, but it is worth mentioning that they were just one of two. So in Genesis chapter 2, and specifically in the latter half of the chapter, we get more details into the how and the why that woman was created for man. And the Bible says that, for this reason, the man and his wife shall cleave and there will be one flesh. And God's original design was that out of their union, out of their physical union, not just physical, but also emotionally, but out of their union, more life would come. Because God is about proliferating life. He is life. In him and him alone is found life. And part of continuing to show his image, to spread his glory, is that life would continue. And so in his wisdom, he designed us in such a way that life could be proliferated through that union. And then we can even look in the New Testament where the Apostle Paul in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 22 through 33, that Paul actually explains more that God created the one flesh union not only to proliferate physical life, but to be a picture of the unity that he wants to have with his body, his church. So the marriage between husband and wife becomes a metaphor for the type of relationship that Christ wants to have with us, his church, his body. The husband would be willing to even lay down his life for his wife, just like Christ has literally laid down his life for us, his church, his bride. And so we can see that marriage is a covenant relationship that God designed, so that part of that reason being that more life would come from that union, that love would lead to more life. And the Bible, it's a central theme in the Bible, because we can see that the Bible starts with a marriage in Genesis and it ends with a marriage in the book of Revelation. So, there are people that believe that Jesus didn't actually address same-sex unions in the New Testament because, he doesn't say anything explicitly about it. But what they don't understand is that the reason Jesus didn't need to address same-sex unions directly is because he's already addressed marriage and the union that he designed when he ordained the first marriage back in the beginning, back in Genesis. So he has already defined what marriage is at the beginning. So, here's a Bible study tip for you. When you want to learn the truth about a specific topic, don't start in the middle or the end. You go back to the beginning, go back to where that topic was first mentioned, and that's where you're going to find the original truth that God intended for it. So, this is why when the Pharisees asked Jesus about divorce in Matthew 19, he tells them, the first thing he says is, "Have you not read?" So he's pointing them back to the scriptures, and he says, that he which made man, that he which made them at the beginning made them male and female. So he's telling them, look, go back to what I originally ordained, what I originally designed, and take not just your doctrine, but take the life, compare the life that you're living to what I have said in the beginning, and you can see, what my original intent was. And so, as we discussed, we've seen that marriage it's not just a societal construct that we can adapt as, we quote unquote evolve over time. Marriage was divinely orchestrated with intent, and it was designed at creation, at the beginning, to be the vehicle from which life would come. And not only that, but the husband and wife relationship is the prime illustration for how God illustrates his love for his church. And so, based on what we've seen so far about Satan, we know that Satan hates it. All right. So, of course, he is going to unleash unholy war on marriage and on human sexuality. So we should be shocked, but we shouldn't be surprised that we live in a society, where sexually explicit sites are the most visited sites on the internet, where children are sexually abused at alarming rates, where human beings are trafficked as sex slaves. There are more slaves now than ever in the history of the world. Sex is viewed as casual, easy to come by, and easily accessible. And, marriage is now whatever we define it to be. So really the extent to which the enemy has twisted the gift of sexuality, it demonstrates how powerful it is. It shows us just how important this is. So God made everything good, and within the parameters that he defined it and he orchestrated it, it is good. So the enemy has convinced us that, we can decide for ourselves what is good. We don't need God's rules or his order. We can decide for ourselves, and he's convinced us that this is okay. And, as we've mentioned, this is the same war that we've been talking about. This is the war that he's waged from the beginning. And many people criticize the church for pinpointing, some sins over others. And, there is some truth to that. But what we need to understand is that sexual sins, sexual matters of gender and sexual identity, they're on a different playing field than, just lying or gossiping, for example, because when we start messing with sex, we are messing with the core, part of the core of what God created us to be. And so it's not just happenstance. It's not just something that we can take lightly. It really affects the core of who we are. And so this is, again, why the enemy is having a field day with distorting it. This is why sexual abuse is so destructive. It's why if he can convince us that there is no objectivity about sexual desire, we are just subject to our own inclinations and whatever we think is right, then he succeeds in continuing to mar the image of God because he mars us, right? He's going to continue to try to snuff out life where he can. And so I just want to take this time and pause and just really think things through for a moment. So if we've seen how foundational sexuality is to us as God's creation, that he took time and thought things through for a purpose, and we know that there's an enemy that hates God and hates us and will do any and everything he can to destroy us. We have to ask this question: is it possible that you and I have been deceived into thinking that something that feels right and what we think is right is actually not? The Bible says that Satan is the father of lies, and that he is the orchestrator of deception. And if the father of lies, if Satan first deceived a third of the angelic host who were in the very presence of God, and if he was also successful in deceiving Eve, who had direct face-to-face communication with the God of creation, right, in the very beginning, is it possible, just possible, that he could also deceive you and I? Is it possible that what we thought was love is not love as God defines it? And what we thought was a light is not light, but it's a false light. I hope you've taken time to consider that. But also understand that God has not left us to remain victims in this battle for our minds. He has not left us just to remain victims of the enemy's deception. He has made a way for us to be victorious, right? And so there is hope. In part 5, we're going to continue to see how this battle has played out in our culture. And ultimately, we're going to get to what God's solution is, what God has done to help us be victorious. And so I pray that something that was said in this session has, caused you to think about things in a new way, perhaps in a different way. And I do hope that you will come back for part 5.